My paper, The Network of Empire and Universal Capitalism, Imperialism and the Laws of Capitalist Competition, it addresses the question of what is the distinctive logic of imperialism under fully developed capitalism, and how can it be understood using Marx's analytical method and framework. Now, we know that imperialism has many forms, many mechanisms, it predates capitalism, but Alan Meekson Wood had argued quite brilliantly that there's a distinct capitalist logic which emerges from the imposition of the imperatives of capital accumulation and enhanced social productivity through social labor on a global scale. And it is this rather than advantages from extra economic kind of power, which impose unfavorable terms of trade on subordinate nations, which is key to capitalist imperialism. So this logic kind of mirrors the appropriation of surplus value through the wage labor contract. Now, I try to take this further. I argue that the distinctive logic of capitalist imperialism arises from the use of imperial power to expand the pool of surplus value available for capital as a whole to exploit. And so it can be interpreted as a kind of a network externality of the expanding web of control of capital in the core. So a dominant position in the network of capitalist relation kind of enables imperial power to claim a larger share of this growing global surplus, which is accruing from this network externality for its capitalists. So there are two dimensions. The first is the public good dimension, the expansion of the pool of available surplus value, not just by expanding the reach of capitalist social relations, but also by intensifying the rate of exploitation. So the key is that the rate of exploitation is increasing both in the core and the periphery through the intensification of competition between different segments of the labor force and the expansion of the global reserve army of labor. So the expansion of the cross-border corporate network subsumes larger magnitude of labor under its control, and it extends the scale and scope of the tendencies of capitalist competition so that the rate of exploitation rises overall. So this is the network externality, right? And so each individual capitalist, to quote Marx, participates in the exploitation of the entire working class by capital as a whole. And in the level of this exploitation, not just in terms of general class sympathy, but direct economic sense. So the second aspect, which is the predatory aspect, is that imperial power enables the appropriation of a larger share of this global pool of surplus value by the imperialist core. So this, I argue, is affected by the establishment of and protection of property rights, in particular with intangible capital, knowledge, technology, etc., which is under the control of capital and states in the core. So a dominant position in the in this hub, in the pivotal hub of the imperial network, allows the extraction of a larger share of wealth and surplus. And this is basically arises from monopoly of the network over that network externality. And this network externality can arise through control over trade and shipping networks, global production networks, information and new technology, hubs of finance, or the status of being the issuer of the key global currency, world money. So this appropriation of imperial rents, which accrue from the network externalities, represents what I call the distinctively capitalist imperative of imperial expansion. So that is the core of what I'm arguing. Okay, so in the existing literature, imperialism has been explained either in terms of the suspension of the laws of capitalism, specifically the laws of competition, with this higher distinct stage of monopoly capital. This is the monopoly capital school. It's also seen more recently in Smith's work on super exploitation of labor in the periphery. And on the other, the relationship of capitalism with a pre-capitalist periphery, which serves as a source of raw materials, labor markets, going back to Rosa Luxemburg. Okay, so given this, there's a need to theorize imperialism in a way where it is both specific to and internal to capital. So if and in terms of the fullest expression of capitalism, once it engulfs the entire globe, a kind of universal capitalism. So we need to explain it in terms of the fruition of the laws of capitalism rather than the suspension. And that's what I'm trying to do. Develop a theoretical framework which does this. And the key is, again, the argument about monopoly arising not from market structure, but from property rights, which may limit the mobility of capital and labor and allow the appropriation of monopoly rents. So, so this is my key distinction. So the competitive aspect comes in the public good sphere of imperialism, which I talked about, extending the scale of competition, and the predatory aspect is the monopoly aspect. And this is really important because it kind of underscores how capital subjects workers across the globe to the force of competitive pressures, which divide and fragment the labor. So you have informal labor markets in the periphery, you have fissured workplaces at the core. So there's a race to bottom in both the core and periphery. So the kind of argument which comes up in both the monopoly capital school and in the super exploitation of labor pits workers in the periphery against the workers in the south. But the focus should be on capital and what is it doing globally. And so, that is, I think, the key contribution and the difference, my point of departure. My paper is kind of developing a more abstract formulation, a kind of a general theory of imperialism based on laws of competition or laws of motion of capital. The work which needs to be done, and I would like to do, is on concrete applications in the context of both the British and the US. And so this work done recently by Durand and Milberg, for example, looking at the asymmetric distribution of intangible capital in global value chains. Now, how does one relate the idea of the network externality and imperialism as rents from that to these global value chains? Even more interesting, the context of big technology. There's a close connection between defense, intelligence, and big tech. You see that in the US, and you see a different manifestation in China. So that's worth exploring as a concrete application of this kind of framework. And I guess the harder thing, which I would like to work as, okay, so if this is a theory of the capitalist logic of imperialism, how does one explain the erosion of imperial hegemony? What sets it off? And the context, of course, is, let's say, the US-China and the whole contention over, for example, the development of 5G technology, the Huawei controversy, or the attempts to internationalize the renminbi. How far can they erode imperialist hegemony? How does the network, control over the network, erode or shift? Those are, I think, questions which are still open.